All right, let's chat a little bit about the preseason roster for Portland Thorns. There have been some cuts for some teams as the regular season inches closer and closer. But for Portland, this is who we saw through the preseason. We saw Bella Bixby, Shelby Hogan, and Lauren Cazal for the goalkeeping core. For defenders, they listed 10 with Shaylin Hubbard, Kelly Hubley, Megan Klingenberg, Natalie Cuica, Tegan McGrady, Emily Menges, Megan Nally, Gabby Provenzano, Arena Reyes, and Becky Sauerbrunn. For midfielders, 8 are listed: Sam Coffey, Crystal Dunn, Olivia Moultrie, Taylor Porter, Sydney Pulver, Rocky Rodriguez, Christine Sinclair, and Hina Sugita. And for forwards, Janine Becky, Natalie Beckman, Hannah Beffer, Izzy Diakia, Lauren DeBow, Sophia Smith, Michelle Vasconcelos, and Morgan Weaver included amongst the forward as well. Let's talk a little bit about these players. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4-ish players listed as draft players amongst this roster. So we know right away those are the new faces in this team. But we're talking about 4 draft picks amongst so many other players who have already had some time together, a number of which are champions together as well. Maybe let's start with the midfielders because we were just talking about Yasmin Ryan and what that could look like and the hole that she may or may not be leaving behind in her absence. Coffee, Dunn, Moultrie, Porter, Pulver, Rodriguez, Sinclair, Sugita. I know when we were watching Thorns games last year, we were really, really high on Sugita, and I just think he's going to be another one of those players that they really rely upon.
Yeah,
in the middle, especially in light of the absence of Ryan.
Yeah, I think they will rely on someone like Ahina Sugita, and not only the technical skill, but the football IQ of a player like Sugita to be able to play this really smart, intelligent style football that Portland likes to play. And despite a coaching change at the helm for the Thorns, I don't think the style of football is going to change all that much because Mike Norris, now head coach, was there last year. He understands the foundation that Portland Thorns has and what they want to play. And also last year in 2021, Portland Thorns saw the return of Crystal Dunn towards the end of the year, that a player like Dunn slowly building more and more minutes up. And as we know from her international play during this offseason, Dunn is back. She's 100% ready to go, 90-minute games. Let's go, which I think maybe also helps fill that hole of a Yasmin Ryan, which I mean, the fact that Ryan is no longer there, there's still a lot of talent on this roster. I think I'm hoping to see more from Olivia Moultrie. This is a player that we've seen an evolution over the last couple of years, more and more minutes, more consistency, continuing to grow her international game. But can we see even more consistency from a Moultrie? Maybe a few consecutive starts from this player, which is something we really haven't seen too much of. I think the midfield is one of the pieces of this Portland Thorns puzzle that is perhaps the most stacked with the talent that they have in Sam Coffey, Crystal Dunn, Christine Sinclair, Hina Sugita, Rocky Rodriguez. And then also the part that still has some holes to fill in terms of how they're going to play against opposition this year, because the other teams in the league have also kind of leveled up their midfield, so to say. And of course, this is a World Cup year. We're going to talk about it, but that leaves a lot of holes. But in this forward group, there's a lot of fun names that jump out, but Morgan Weaver is a player that I want to continue to see evolve with this Portland Thorns team. She's one that has had moments of greatness and then had a lot of moments of really good contribution. But I want to see her score more goals. Honestly, it sounds so simple to ask that of a forward and Morgan Weaver, but I know she's playing alongside someone like a Sophia Smith who so easily knocks him back and finds the back of the net. Yeah. But I want Morgan to challenge Sophia Smith in that goal scoring race at Portland Thorns. I just want to see a little bit more from Weaver this year in her all-fall movement and her shot selection.
I think maybe this is the year to do that. You know, we talk a lot in some of these previews about this being a World Cup year and how these international cycles tend to provide, opportunities for players in the absence of, international players who are off, with their national teams for something like an Olympics or a World Cup. So I don't think that's like an unrealistic thing to present. I think in this case for the Thorns, when we're looking at the personnel in front of them and players who will likely be with the team throughout some of these long stretches in the absence of some of these other players, and we'll talk about some of those players who are going to go missing perhaps for Portland's, because there's a lot of them, and we'll break them all down. But in terms of looking at starting 11s and who can make impacts on game days for this team, whether it's a young prospect or that experienced veteran, I think when we ran through this roster, pointed out about 4 different draftees on the preseason roster. So when it comes to that young prospect, who do we want to see make an impact? And we're going back and forth a little bit because I think there's room to actually make a selection for some of these draft picks, but there's also room to present that for players who are going to have a sophomore season in NWSL. And for the Thorns, we're looking at Reina Reyes as someone to possibly get in there, make a name for herself, and try to say, hey, you picked me with your number 5 pick overall. You obviously want to keep me as a piece, maybe build with me, and I'm going to show you that I'm worth it. But there's also somebody like a Sam Coffey.
Yeah.
While she re-signed with the team, going to enter a sophomore season with the Thorns, and how is she going to look now that now that she's got a sense of security? Really, they renegotiated the contract. They wanted to make sure to lock her up, and that can benefit a player moving forward.
Yeah, I hope that the contract negotiation for Coffey to sign her for a considerable amount of time after her rookie year does give that player a little bit of confidence. And I think that this offseason has been challenging for a player like Sam Coffey because of the international conversation, because Sam Coffey was in and out of the United States women's national team roster. She went to New Zealand, and then she didn't play at all in New Zealand, and then she didn't get rostered for the She Believes Cup in February. And is she out of that conversation? And I think it can affect a player's mentality about the sport when you are in that group in that conversation and now you're no longer. But for someone like a Coffey, I think that because it happened in January and February leading up to the start of a season at the end of March, I'm hoping that the maturity of a player that had so much pressure and had to grow a lot as a professional in 2022 is able to take that experience of the international game and not being called in to be able to say, okay, I'm going to focus all of my energy onto my club team and be so much better than I was last year. When she's already at the top of her game, the ceiling is so high for a player like Coffey. I want to see her continue to grow and take those steps. And I hope that she has the confidence to do that this year. Now, there's always the side of it that goes, she knows a little bit more about the league. And she did go through and get a Rookie of the Year nomination and win the championship. And the naivety of being a rookie maybe helped her a little bit. But I think that she's still surrounded by the same players, all but one, that were there last year. She is still familiar with Mike Norris as the coach. I'm excited for Coffey, and I think Reina Reyes could step in as, despite being a draft pick and a rookie this year and a defender who we don't often see get a lot of time, I think she's one of the players that we could see get rotated in and start to get a little bit more time in the back line as this year kind of unfolds.
Yeah, no, we'll have to see, especially during those Challenge Cup windows.
Yeah.
When that's where there will be some midweek matches, and we'll have to take a look at it maybe during the stretch of a World Cup in light of some players who will go missing. And listen, for the Thorns, there's a lot of big names on this roster, but that also means that they're big names because they're attached to national teams as well, and not just the United States. We're talking Canada, Japan. Talking Costa Rica. So let's take a look at some of these players who might go missing for some stretches of time here. Christine Sinclair and Janine Becky, we feel will be absent, likely representing Canada in a World Cup. Hina Sugita is someone that we could see with Japan after, we're talking about this is a player that they might rely upon a bit in the midfield, even more so than they did in her inaugural season with the club last year. But Becky Sauerbrunn, Crystal Dunn, Sophia Smith. Listen, those are locks for us. I know we think we're going to see them at the World Cup for the United States, whether there's a final roster announced yet or not. But there's also Rocky Rodriguez for Costa Rica. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 7 possible
massive
player. We're talking about starting caliber players.
7 starters. 7 starters that could be gone for the bulk of the Challenge Cup play throughout this year in 2023. I mean, and these are big names, especially when you look at the midfield that could be lost, right? That's a Christine Sinclair, Hina Sugita, Crystal Dunn, Rocky Rodriguez. That's why when we talked about the midfield and we looked at this roster, we pointed out players like a Sam Coffey, like an Olivia Moultrie. Can they really step in and fill some of those holes that these international players are going to leave? And I also think that's why it allows for someone like a Reina Reyes as the young prospect, a rookie this year out of Alabama, to get some significant time in the Challenge Cup days for this Portland Thorns side, because someone like a Becky Sauerbrunn is going to be gone. And yes, they have Kelly Hubley in the back line, Megan Klingenberg, Kuika, but I want to see Reyes get some time. I mean, these are huge names, huge names.
No, me too. I'm with you. Listen, they participated in that multi-team trade in order to get the extra first round selection. My hope is that these players do enough in preseason to earn themselves, a contract, and maybe we get to see them during this international cycle. The disjointedness, though, leaves a lot of room for some what ifs. We've seen teams struggle during these stretches of times. I don't know if I would necessarily include Portland in that equation. I think the last time maybe they went on a really tough streak during a World Cup cycle might have been during that 2015 World Cup. They didn't look too bad to me during the cycle of 2019, and they didn't look too bad during that Tokyo Olympic cycle either, in terms of the absence of players there. So there's something to say about this club retaining the players that they have played in the NWSL Championship, and it's still mostly that roster who lifted the trophy. But with some of the players who will come in and come out, it still leaves room for the question of how they're going to fare during these international stretches. But that's not our biggest burning question. Our biggest burning question for Portland is, can they repeat? Because we believe that they can. It's tough to win championships in the National Women's Soccer League. We've heard players talk about that all of the time. It's such a triumphant moment when they do win titles. You can see the joy on their faces and the agony and defeat when they miss out on it. So we know how hard it is to win titles. We cover it, we watch it all the time, but it's even harder to win consecutive championships. And the last time I think we saw that was during that stretch of run with the North Carolina Courage. 2018 and 2019. So we haven't seen it.
Very hard to do. I remember last year during the playoff run, we talked about one of the graphics that CBS was using a lot was the back-to-back winners and how it worked. And you look at a team like Washington Spirit that won in 2021, and then we're suffering in 2022. Now we have this team, and their roster, Washington's roster, did not change much going from 2021 to 2022. And now we have this Portland team that their roster hasn't changed too much going from one championship year to the other. And when you look at the landscape of all other 11 teams in the NWSL, their rosters have bulked up tremendously. Can Portland do it? Can they do a two-peat? It is going to be much easier, much harder than it ever was last year, much harder than they ever imagined it to be. But because of who they've got, the players, the personnel, the fact that they were able to do it last year, I predict a top 3 finish for this team to end the year. I do. I think they'll be right there competing for a first-round bye at the end of the season during the playoffs. And then once you get into playoffs, it's a whole other story. But I think that Portland could do it. If there's a team that can do it, it's this Portland side. There's a lot of similarities to that North Carolina team that went back-to-back a few years ago.
When we were going through our rundowns and contemplating this, we had approximately 3 teams that we knew that we felt are going to round out the top 3 and top 4. We got to call it top 4 because it's always been 4 teams that are considered like the heavyweight contenders. Prior to the playoff expanding to 6 teams, it was always 4 teams in a semifinal and then championship finals appearance. Now there's a quarterfinal round and then a semifinal round, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're a top 4 team, that means you get to host. So it means something to be a top 4 team. But for the Thorns, we think it's going to be somewhere in the top 3. It's not even going to be top 4. We think it's going to be top 3 for sure. I just think the Thorns aren't too different. I think that is the one common thread. I think when we're talking about this World Cup year and all of these previews for each of the 12 clubs, every single team is going to go through a stretch of time where they are missing key players. Are there going to be some teams with more players absent than some others? Sure. But I think the Thorns and the depth of their roster have shown that they can stay relevant.
Yeah.
They can compete through those stretches. And I think that's what gives them a little bit of the X factor.
That's what makes them scary. If you're other teams and you're looking at this Portland side, that's what makes them scary.
I mean, we talked a little bit about even last year with watching somebody like Yasmin Ryan. It's like once she got that opportunity in that window of time to get in there and go on the run that she went on, she absolutely was like, you're not putting me back on the bench.
I know.
I'm snatching this opportunity and running with it. And she rode it all the way through the championship finals. So we'll see. We'll see who's going to be those players to step up and sort of steal the spotlight a little bit. It's going to be exciting to watch, but we definitely think it's going to be in a top 3 finish for the Portland Thorns. And hopefully they give us all a special treat and introduce a back-to-back championship run. We'd love to cover it. We'd love to see it